Boom.
I'm below.
This is the Mindset Mentorship Podcast, where we identify in this one in particular, where we identify the principle of the self-existent, the principle of self-existence in spirituality, in life, and relationships. Right? And in this podcast, we identify the codependencies, the identity codependencies that are affecting each and every person in their spirituality, in their life, and in their relationships. And we reorientate that. Right? I am your host, Zain El Fuego, the Christ pneumatologist. And accompanying me, of course, is the lovely
Lady Katura. The lioness.
The lioness. Right? This podcast in particular is not one of the high energy. This is actually a podcast to encourage you to ruminate, to give thought to the things that we're going to be speaking about, and bring you into some perspective as to the things that you may be a victim of, or maybe, or we hope not guilty of. Right, in the areas of spirituality, in life and relationships. In this episode in particular, we start specifically on the laws of power exposed. Right, now, many people in particular are in relationships, particularly in relationships, family relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and even marriages. And maybe with persons who are familiar or have been educated on the laws of power, and you may not know.
No.
They may be applying these laws with you in your family relationships, in your friendships, in your romantic relationships, in your marriages, even on your workplace. Yeah, your management, your bosses, those who you're answering to. Yeah, the executive level management. Right, may have been educated in this, and you may have found yourself a victim of these things and not too sure why. You just know it's not feeling right.
Yeah. In this podcast, we're actually going to expose it so that you could no longer feel like a victim, feel like you're suffering, feel like, things going haywire and you're not understanding why. As we call this podcast the Mindset Mentorship Podcast, is for you to actually change the mindset so that you can understand how to function and not be manipulated. Change your perspective a little bit so that you can no longer stand on the victim side of the fence.
Yeah. Some of you may come from situations where you are being mentally abused, physically abused, some even to the point of sexual abuse. And when it comes to the emotional and mental abuse that comes with that, sometimes the scars that you're experiencing, or the scars that you carry, are not necessarily bodily scars, right? But these scars, nonetheless, especially in the areas of emotional abuse, mental abuse, are scars that can affect the rest of your life. Yeah, and mental manipulation can lead to problems with intimacy. It can lead to problems with trust, respect, feelings of insecurity. Yeah, and these relationships in particular are actually find themselves in a place where it's very dysfunctional. Right, and particularly specifically with regards to the laws of power that we're going to be speaking about here tonight. These laws in particular have been applied in many different areas. I have encountered it myself in family relationships where persons within the familial circle have actually used them and caused much destruction emotionally and mentally in the family unit. Shout out to Paul Brown. Just see his message there, bro.
Good night, bro.
Yeah, shout out to Paul Brown of sunshiplifestyle.com. Everybody should, if you're listening to this, go to sunshiplifestyle.com and check out Paul Brown. Yeah, there are people who in familial circles that have been applying these laws and placing and actually causing a lot of people within those arenas to fall into the trap. But it is a mental and emotional cage that many successfully fall into by these laws. These psychological laws of power are really psychological laws of manipulation and control. And because of many persons' lack of awareness of the psychological tactics and strategies that are actually being applied, you find yourself in situations where you feel powerless. You find yourself in situations where you feel oppressed mentally and emotionally. I've seen persons actually apply this with friendships, business relationships. I've seen it applied in relationships and marriages, where persons who desire to have some sort of control to get what they want in a relationship and marriage, they literally take these laws in particular that we're going to be speaking about here tonight and apply to their spouse, whether it's woman to man or man to woman, and begin to psychologically abuse the persons that they're in a relationship with, and it causes destruction.
Right.
And for persons who are not aware of these psychological strategies or the stratagem that this comes with, they fall into this trap where they feel powerless. They have no voice. They feel surprised when the person does what they does what they are doing, because they really invest a certain amount of trust into these people, into their spouse, and the spouse turns around and do these things that surprises them. It ends up in a form of emotional betrayal.
Yeah.
You may find yourself that you're feeling a little bit confused.
You know, it's to be on the opposite side with what you're talking about there, on the receiving side, as a matter of fact, is really not a good thing. It actually, a lot of what we see in these laws of power that we're going to dive into involves a lot of deceit and deception. And it's used as like a strategy to try and, I suppose, distract the other person from seeing the true intention. And a lot of people end up in relationships, as you were saying just now, unaware, probably naive. You know, you wouldn't think that you would experience that with the person that you're in, because the person doesn't come across to be someone malicious. You know, they may give you the best and give you the impression that, you know, they are all for you. And it's like a smoke screen.
Yeah.
They're preying upon your weakness.
And sometimes because of the way they carry it about, they carry about themselves, and they're using this. Many people may experience things in a relationship where they feel like whatever they're really experiencing, they don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe that the person will do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they don't want to believe that the person that they invest in this themselves into emotionally and mentally would actually treat them like that. They don't want to believe that. And in some cases, in other cases, you may find yourself where you're experiencing these laws and it causes you to question yourself. You really begin to
Yeah.
question whether you remember things in the way it really happened, or is it that you a lot of people actually get to the point of thinking maybe something is wrong with them mentally.
Right. I've been there. I know what it's like.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Share a little bit, no?
No, I don't know if the person was intentionally using these laws on me. I suppose it was. I suppose it was happening and I was unaware. But I remember finding myself in a place where I was, as you were saying just now, questioning if I was doing things right or wrong. I was questioning myself, thinking, well, the problem must have been me. It must
Right.
have been that. Hey, I am the one who's at fault here, and I'm constantly self-assessing, unaware that the person was, you know, doing it deceitfully,
Right.
the
You
manipulative side.
end up questioning yourself and questioning whether you remember the events as the person actually said the events were,
Uh huh. And as I
right?
said just now, confused. I was like, wait, what's going on here? The state of confusion.
Right. Yeah, another thing that actually comes with that is anxiety and vigilance. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you think that you begin to suspect that something is not right. This person could be doing things to manipulate you, and you become hyper aware
Uh huh.
of yourself and you're hyper aware of others.
And
Yeah, and
with that kind of experience, what you tend to do is like anything resembling like an outburst or something like that the person may have used to manipulate you. That kind of behavior starts to become like a red flag, and you become very sensitive towards it and other people too.
yeah, and you start to try to mash the eggs, so that
Yeah.
take your time to walk around them because you don't want to rock the boat. Yeah, if you're experiencing these things, this podcast is for you. Right? The addressing of these psychological laws of power is for you. You may be dealing with someone who may have been aware of these laws of power and may not be aware of it in the structure that we're going to the structure that we're going to be speaking about it, but they have been using what they know to get you to be
Uh,
able to get you to do what they want you to do,
yep.
right? And because of that, you may end up in a situation where, because of the manipulation control, you're not being a little passive, because you believe that if you actually go outright and you take action, it can cause um more emotional abuse.
Right. So when you say being passive, you mean you start to allow things to slide
Right.
because you're trying
You
to
don't
take
want to
into
stand up.
consideration.
You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to stand up. You don't want to stand up at all. Right? And on the other side of the spectrum, the way the person actually may turn around and blame you for everything. Right? And in the control, they actually they indirectly attribute the blame to you for not feeling for their lack of validation. And it causes you to start to feel like you're feeling ashamed. You're feeling
Yeah.
guilty. Right? No, with with all of that, feel like you don't want to. You're walking on eggshells. You don't want to do anything that could spike behavior. Right? And these things, dealing with these things over a length of time, develop into other things.
So what you basically categorize those some of those things as like some of the short term effects in a way.
What I would categorize it as?
Yeah. Would you say it's like short term effects?
Well, I wouldn't say short-term effects. That's just your immediate response to the sense of betrayal that you may be experiencing, sense of emotional betrayal, and that in particular, once it stays there for lengths of time,
Mm-hmm.
develop into greater things where you actually transition into always looking for validation in the relationship
So it's like a
because
tree.
yeah,
It
you start
grows.
you start off with these little roots and then it grows into larger things, and you find yourself in a relationship where you're looking for validation and approval, and sometimes with regards to what you're experiencing, because of the emotional manipulation, the psychological control and manipulation, you can't really express what you're really feeling, so then you start to get resentful,
Mm-hmm.
right, because of the excessive the judging and so on.
So it's like all the frustration actually building up and you reach to a point where you just just become, I suppose, certain things are become intolerable.
And eventually you'll explode.
Yeah.
Eventually you'll explode, and either end up in things like depression, or you just one day just burst out in anger. And we're actually looking at this here because the thing, those being in situations like that where you are, yeah, I know we're now seeing actually Paul Ron saying, I like that, so true. Yeah, bro. Laurie says, being there and they blame their bad behavior on you. Always,
Yep.
always. Right? Which these are the things in particular that end up in eventually the person who is the victim of that and may not know that they're the victim of emotional manipulation because they come into the relationship with sincerity and
Mm-hmm.
genuinity, and they really want to connect with this person. And this person could actually be functioning with this, what psychology refer to as narcissistic tendencies. And then you may encounter persons that really know, like, instruct you these laws that we're going to be talking about here. Now, these laws of power are known in the society as laws of psychological power. But all of these laws of power actually, as you see them presented, much like the 48 laws of power, they really have roots in historical texts, ancient texts. I won't say ancient texts, but texts that go back centuries ago. One of the books where you see the presence or the articulation of this kind of control is by an old book called The Art of War. You hear about that book, Kelly?
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Yeah,
I
The
don't
Art
think
of
I've
War
ever
was.
read it, but
Yeah, I would recommend most people to actually take a look at that because you live in a society where both in the corporate sector, in relationships and marriages, people actually go and look up these things and they begin to use it in relationships. And you may be the innocent, very genuine one, really trying to connect and may not understand how to connect. You just know that you really enjoy this, and you really want to have a connection. And you may be facing someone who is deviously and deviantly applying this and
yeah.
and taking your sincerity and destroying you to be able to
What
get
I've
what they
not
want.
what I've noticed as well is that people who have experienced this kind of manipulation, they tend to feel very insecure about themselves after the experience, or feel like they're lacking confidence, or that they are not their worth because of
Right.
what has previous relationship. It could be a close friend that did it, or someone that you admired and really trusted. And
Mm-hmm.
when that when you come out of a situation like that, there's recovery too. Like there are a lot of things that probably you're unaware of from a previous relationship with that person that you
Yeah,
bring into the other connections. The things like constant need for validation because the person before who was like applying these laws of power may have made you
yeah,
feel like
you're
like
not
their
enough,
exactly and like
and
their
you have a right.
approval
It's yeah,
is
the,
necessary.
the approval is necessary for you. Yeah, and one of the things that we want to highlight here as we dive into this is that if you, in and of yourself, do not have an established understanding, an established framework of how a relationship is supposed to run objectively, that is one of the disadvantages of the westernized perspective of relationship. One of the biggest disadvantages of the westernized perspective of relationship is the fact that um is the fact that the typical westernized perspective is connecting to persons by emotional attachment.
Yeah.
There is no actual objective relationship. And when I say objective relationship, an objective relationship would be when two persons who sit down and they actually understand that they've come to the point where they want to have a relationship and they sit down and they express each other's expectations and come to a point of agreement where these expectations can be taken on as each other's promises and they inspire each other. That is foreign to most to the westernized society. And because the emotional attachment is actually the one where the approach where you do not make agreements, where there was no discussion in that area, emotional attachment is the approach and is the method that is used for relationship. And you may do that with the wrong person, with the person who is not as genuine as you are. And your expectation is that they will treat your investment with care and concern and treat it sacred, treat your intimacy with sacredness. And they may know what we're going to be speaking about here in a structure, or they very well may not very much know it in a structure like that. And they may not understand it structurally, but they know their own little tactics that they have learned over time to get you to try to do what they want you to do. And so, because you don't have a framework to work with, you cannot actually assess what is taking place because you're working with the idea that this person wouldn't do you something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like it's not in your awareness to think, to even consider that this person is capable of doing that to you. So you have
Right.
all your cards down. And even what you were talking about a while ago, that concept was very foreign to me, where you establish a connection by mutuality. Because as you rightfully saying, the society, what we see on Hollywood and stuff like that is usually what sets the pace or the trend. And what we are accustomed with is people getting emotionally attached to each other and really hoping, as you were saying, that they're with someone of integrity.
Yeah.
And the trustworthiness isn't built. And because that trustworthiness isn't built, basically, usually the sincere person is hoping that the other party, who may not be the sincere party, is going to, show regard and concern for them and the same love and compassion. And I mean, I had an experience in that too, where, I was hoping without having something to hold the person accountable to, because it was all in my mind that, hopefully the person will hold the same values and the principles that I shared. And
Right.
even within the Christian arena, this takes place because you think when people talk about God that, everybody's holding to the same integrity. And that isn't always the case. And without having that structure to fall back to, you kind of get tossed into the wind with your emotions with the person, thinking that they have a cool vibes or cool spirit and end up trusting beyond and then get hurt.
Yeah, you actually feel a sense of betrayal. Yeah, Paul Brown says here, I've noticed many people who manipulate are genuine people. Most of them are givers, but they're so focused on a false identity of self that they need approval, which to validate approval to validate self. But the manipulation is a way of life for them that they have identified to, and they give and give and give. When they don't get results, they explode. This happens a lot with people who are bipolar, which I know firsthand because I was healed of it too. There's so much more to it.
Yep.
Yeah. So in that context in particular, if you don't, as we're saying here, if you don't have a framework of how a relationship functions, you can easily be a victim of these things. Now, the psychological laws of power that we're speaking about, most people speaking about these books in particular, this material, frequent executive, the corporate world, they frequent a lot of relationships, marriages, and people actually take them and bring them into familial relationships and friendships. And you may find yourself in these in these relationships, which is what psychology today refers to as toxic relationships. So what we're going to do here is actually take a look at some of these psychological laws. And if these are laws that you think that you may have experienced, you may have found yourself in experience, comment. We would love to hear what your experience has been. Give us a little short message in the comments as to how this actually affected you, and what it actually caused. Because long-term exposure to these things cause you to fall into the category of, as Paul Brown put it, being bipolar, where you may have been exposed to relationships like that, and because of the length of time that you're dealing with it, your heart is saying one thing, and then you actually being put in a position where you're not able to express your heart. And most people who actually find themselves in situations in those kind of toxic environments for lengths of time, they lose a sense of identity, and they actually demonstrate this bipolar reaction, which is really the balance between the false identity that Paulie just mentioned and what they're really feeling in their heart. They're not living from their heart directly. Yeah. So let's dive in. And just to actually, I began actually giving a little background here. The psychological laws of power that we're going to dive in here is actually something that's been around for some time. And for those of you who haven't read The Art of War, if you read that book has been a go-to for the modern world to actually, with regards to psychological power in the workplace, in relationships, in marriages, in friendships, even in family relationships. Right? It's actually a book written by a Chinese general called Sun Tzu. You can look it up online, The Art of War. And Sun Tzu actually put this book together from his experience and the tactics that he used in understanding the human mind to be able to control his army, to command the respect of his army, whilst getting maximum potential out of his army. And at the same time, the tactics that he would use when he would approach nations for war.
Okay.
So that he would actually win the battle psychologically. And in most cases, once he gains psychological superiority in the interaction between the army that he may be facing, he's already won the war. Because the grit that you need to actually fight must come from a sense of security. And if you are actually in a position where you're insecure, you will not be able to accurately and competently assess the tactics that you're dealing with and how to counteract it and how to eliminate it. Right. This book has been written, and it provides information as to how he would actually how he would go about commanding the respect of his army. In the book in particular, in The Art of War, there's some good information, and it actually shows how he took people who were not even soldiers and made them soldiers and commanded their respect. right? So the books, the psychological books on psychological power that you have in the society now have actually taken those laws that comes from these guys who've been fighting war, and they literally applied to the corporate world, to the relationships and so on,
There's a
and not totally
totally
different,
different context.
right? But in essence, what they're actually doing is treating their spouse, their family, their co-workers and so on as enemies.
I was just thinking that. I was like, how in the heck can you take something designed for war and then treat a loved one with the same tactics?
Yeah.
You're declaring war.
The police says our football coach made us read it in high school. See what I'm talking about? Say you need to read it again. All right. I studied that actually a few years ago. Well, not a few years, but at least 10 or 15 years ago. Almost 20 years ago, yeah. And it actually helped me identify psychological control in the workplace, business agreements. People use it, and a lot of people end up falling into the trap of the negotiation and so on, because they don't really understand themselves. They have no framework from which they're living from, and they don't really understand the psychological intent, the evil, and how far people would go to try to get you to do what they want. And many people even end up behind bars because of this kind of psychological control, in a
Wow.
sense, to what's actually taking place. Right? So how would we actually take a look at the first law that we want to take a look at here? Now, for those of you who may be familiar with this, or it sounds like something that you experienced before. Feel free to comment. We would like to hear from you what your experience was. And for those of you who have been using this, we hope that with the integrity of your heart, that you actually pull yourself square, that you actually stop and think about what you've been doing and the damage that you may have been causing. And for those of you who deliberately doing this, take this podcast as a sign that I'm coming for you. The damage that you're causing are coming for you. We want to shed some light on that and expose you, because all creation is actually designed to live self-existently, and all creation, all men deserve the right of self-existent respect. So I'm coming for you. So the first law we want to speak about here, the first law is never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. All right, so it says be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly if they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and controlling. Hire a former enemy, and he'll be more loyal than a friend. Right? Because he has more to prove. Have you found yourself in situations where you did something that could have caused some pain, could have caused hurt? Also, that this law of never put too much trust in friends and learn how to use your enemies also teaches to use enemies and find a way to use enemies. Have you found yourself in situations where you may have done something wrong, you realize that what you did wasn't right, and you feel like the person that you did wrong to, they literally began to exploit your repentance?
Exploiting the repentance.
Yeah, because they know that you are feeling sorry, and they know that you actually you feel like you want to make up for it. They take it and they use it.
Oh, once or twice.
And they have you do things to great extents that sometimes even your heart saying that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But because of how much you want to show that you're sorry, you actually try to accommodate them. How many of us have experienced that?
They're going out all the way. Even sometimes innocently take, well, I wouldn't say innocently, as in your younger years. I mean, the within the teenage circle, I've seen this taking place. And you see it as something normal in the movies as well too, with the bullies especially.
Right.
Where they would, you come back and you say sorry and then they decide, well, they're gonna make you do something that's, you're not too keen about. That is just plain manipulative.
Right. So they, because they know that you want to actually show that you're sorry, they start to use it. You see it as you rightfully say, you see it in a lot of movies and teenage movies. But these things are used in marriages and romantic relationships where they take advantage. And basically, what is coming from is that because of your desire to feel validated by that person, you may end up doing things that is contrary to your conscience. And they will have you do things that may very well be degrading to your personal dignity.
Mm-hmm.
That is not something that you want to really encourage. People do it in relationships, and they take it to great extents. People who
If
actually, go ahead.
if you don't have a reference point, what people tend to do with the situations where that they pick out your reference point. So as you say, if you really desire that validation from that person, that approval somewhere along the line, they tend they may not be aware, as you're saying, of the structure to which they're doing it, but they would sniff it out
Yeah,
and identify where the reference point is let's say the friendship for whatever reason it is. And once they can identify that's your reference point, they will wrap you around their finger to do whatever they think you will do to get that. If
exactly,
if you know
exactly.
what you stand for, then they have nothing to sniff out. You give your
And what you,
apology and you walk.
yeah. So here's our next rule, our next law: never outshine the master. Never outshine those that you think is above you. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In a desire to please or impress them, don't go displaying your talents. Inspire fear and insecurity. Have you in a relationship and the person that you're dealing with makes you feel insecure around them? You're feeling like you're fearful, insecure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been there.
And the person that's actually doing that, they're there, they're around you, and they're doing things, but they're doing it in a way where you will feel insecure about what you're doing.
Yes.
If you're experiencing that, you're being manipulated, you're being controlled.
I've experienced that, and also because of that experience, it was hard to shake it off in other relationships where people really cool, you know, genuine people were in my contact circle, and because of the experience before, I brought across that same insecurity and that looking for that validation kind of thing.
Right. And so because of the actions that are actually taken, the taken actions, they tend to try to make you, to push you forward so that you could feel like you are something. But really and truly, in the way that they do it in a way where you are doing that, but you're a little fearful or you feel insecure about how you're carrying about what you're doing. Right? It's a form of control so that you are unable, you really fall into their validation. They
Mm-hmm.
praise you sufficiently until you feel like you have to depend on their praise to feel approved, to feel like what you're doing whether it is in business, in your relationship with them, in your marriage, in your romantic relationship. They do that in a way where you make you feel like you actually have to do it, and you're doing it fearfully, waiting, and with much insecurity, waiting for them to approve you.
So in a way, you kind of become, they're training you to become dependent on them.
They have what they have done is enslaved you. If you're
Right.
experiencing this, this is actually you are a victim of control and manipulation. Yeah.
Mm.
How, how do you deal with that self-existently? The first thing that you want to do is actually become clear as to what you do and increase your understanding as to what you're doing so that you know what you're doing and whether or not this person actually gives you praise or not. You are very clear about what you're doing. A lot of people actually, what most people tend to overlook is that what you're doing, you should actually have an understanding as to how to do it and how to do it well.
Right. In a case like that, you're not looking towards anybody for anything.
Exactly. Right? So you're functioning self existently where you identify what it is you are doing, how to do it. King Solomon actually says that the self existent man or the wise man increases learning, which means you are to understand what you're doing mechanically so that whatever you're engaging, you know how to do it. And whether people are validating you or praising you or not, you're doing it.
So in a case where, let's say you're on at a work site, and you have an idea, and you know that the idea is actually going to outshine your boss's idea. You know, he may come up with some plan or whatever, and you have something that, you know, actually gonna hit the nail on the head. According to what the self-existence approach is, how would you approach that?
Well, simply be sure to understand what you're doing. Most
Mhm.
people actually may have ideas, and because they have ideas, they want to move forward with it. And moving forward with it is fine, but moving forward without understanding where you're moving it forward, where in which direction you're moving it into, is where personal insecurity would come in. So all you need to do is to be able to understand the environment in which you're doing it, what is necessary, and what is necessary for its success. That should not come from people who are there to give you a pat on your back and validate what you're doing.
Right.
It should come from your certainty of your research, your certainty of its application, so that when you move forward, you can do it. And whether they praise you or not, it doesn't really matter, because you know that what you're doing is functional.
Right. So this has nothing to do with who's outshining you. I mean, the mere fact that you're looking at it through that lens spells insecurity.
Right. Exactly. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is functional. The same thing that should be applied to relationships and marriages. If you're actually having a relationship, you're married to someone or you're having a relationship with someone, you should actually take it upon yourself. Personal responsibility comes with self-existence. You should be personally responsible to understand how a relationship functions. What are the mechanics of the relationship? And if that means that you need to sit down and speak with your spouse to find out what are their expectations, all of that comes under the category of personal responsibility. So if you exercise personal responsibility, you'll never find yourself being manipulated by someone who is praising you and actually subtly causing you, or maybe willfully doing it, so that you may end up searching for their personal validation.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, because once you are never in their personal validation, you are now under their control. If they find that you're doing something that is beyond beyond them and doesn't make them look good, they will not validate you, which means you are crippled.
Right.
Now, King Solomon also said it in a different way. He says, trusting in the opinions of others disables, but trusting in God frees you from that. And in Christ, for those of us who actually walking in Christ, all that simply requires is that you understand what has been breathed into you. What has God put into your spirit, into your energy? Just like the authority of God and God's thought about himself was breathed into the man in the Genesis narrative. Are you clear as to what has been breathed into you? Understanding it and learning how to function in it. From there, validation, you don't need any serpent to validate you. You don't need a serpent. You can function on your own.
Right, and without looking forward to the support or the pat on the back from others around you.
Exactly. Yeah. Next law. Have any of you actually experienced anybody? You may be in a relationship with someone and the person seems like they're always hiding their intentions.
When you say hiding,
they seem to hide intentions. They don't. So this law states, keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. In other words, they're not transparent. They don't come out and tell you outrightly what's going on and why they may be taking this action. Right?
That's not a functional relationship.
This law says if they have no clue as to what you're doing, they don't communicate those things so that you cannot so that whatever they're doing, you will be surprised and you will have no you can't stand up for yourself against it.
I could see how that comes from war, because like in war they'll use some kind of decoy to keep people off guard. I can't figure out why in good heavens would you want to apply that into a relationship where you actually desire to connect with the person.
A lot of people actually do it by deliberately forming an environment where they have you going one way, thinking that you're going one way. Mm-hmm. They pretty much surround the relationship with smoke, where things are not clear. And by the time you realize their true intentions, it's because you're totally unprepared and you find yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable because the person may have known that what you are actually speaking about, the person knows that your conscience and your integrity may not agree with what they're doing and what they're saying and their intentions, and so they cloud the relationship with mist and smoke, so that by the time you realize, they give you a decoy basically, and by the time you realize that's where they're going, it's too late. People do that even in sexual relationships, where they may know that the person in particular that they're with, and let's actually put it into a real case scenario like that. Mm-hmm. They may actually have a sexual relationship with someone, and they know that person may not be interested in certain things, and so they conduct activities in the engagement, given an impression that they're actually showing respect, and then when you least expect it, they actually introduce something, and if you are not someone who would actually stop and say no, stop right there, they put you in a position where you cannot come out of it, either by guilt. Because what?
No, I was going to say, because what they're basically doing is, all right, so I'm just analyzing it as you're going along, right? So basically, if they're giving you a decoy, they're giving you a false sense of security in the relationship.
They're manipulating your trust.
Right. So, which means that you will be investing, putting your heart out, walking in the integrity towards the connection, and they may be connivingly doing what they're doing in the background.
Right.
And what you're saying then in a case like that is they may just drop something on you, and then you're already felt like you're buried into it because of how much
Exactly.
you would have invested emotionally.
Yes. You, because of the trust that you are
Mm-hmm.
that you have given them, they take that trust and they manipulate that trust so that they keep you believing that what you're trusting is real. When
Mm,
really and truly, whether it is in sexual relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, they do it in a way where what their true intentions are may be to rob you of something or to take something from you or to pass a boundary. And you are trusting that they won't do that, so you're not expecting them to do that. And by the time you realize it's too late, they've actually done all of that there. If you've experienced something like that, comment. If you experienced something like that, where you invested trust in relationships, whether it's friendships, family relationships, even in your marriages and so on, comment. We'd love to hear. We'd actually want to hear what your experience was, because that right there is actually manipulation. It's control.
I know I've seen this tactic already. I've seen this happen already in a relationship where the young woman was in a situation where she really needed um assistance, and the young man gave the impression that he was all out for her, like, and she basically, in the situation that she was in, was sincere with her heart, expressed, her feelings and her plans and where she liked to go. And as you were saying before, without having these expectations mutually expressed, she was basically just investing her emotions with the
Right.
hopes that the
Yeah.
person would do the same. And they knew their intentions. The guy knew his intentions from probably day one. And he just chose to conceal it and just kept leading her along until eventually, um, she found out that what she wanted was not what he wanted. But by then, she already felt broken because she had invested so much emotionally.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
it
they
go.
want. Mhm.
And there are other situations where, for example, people end up in relationships. This is a common one. People end up in relationships where the woman wants children,
Mhm.
and she meets someone who says outrightly, "I don't want to have children." And many women, because of how entitled they are, come into the relationship using the relationship with their hidden agenda to change the man's mind over time. That is also manipulation.
Can't change anybody's minds.
So the person clearly said they don't want to have children, and you believe, well, you like this person, and he fits your fancy,
Mhm.
and you get into the relationship, and you say you just give him 2 years, and he will change his mind. According to who? And if he changes his mind, who does that benefit? That is not a relationship. What you're doing is manipulating the person into what you desire. This goes on in relationships with many different things. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you know in the beginning, or if the person has expressed to you this is not what they want, then what both parties should be able to do is to make decisions respecting each other's wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
So
lot of people in situations, also I realize a lot of people, the false sincerity, I would call it false sincerity, sometimes comes across in a way that you would not think that the person is actually doing it with a malicious mindset.
right.
And so they mask themselves. And I'm saying mask because if you know this is how someone truly thinks and feels about you, or this is what they desire, and you know that it's not yours mutually,
Mm-hmm.
then you should man up to it and say, well, this is not what I want, instead of making them think that it and invest themselves into it.
Yeah. So concealing, if you're actually in a relationship where people are concealing their intentions, we encourage you to wake up. Because if they're concealing their intentions, it's usually a manipulation of your trust. So they keep you in the dark, trusting, and you are trusting your idea of their trustworthiness. And a lot of people actually find themselves in those situations because your definition of trust is not it is not objective. Trust in particular is a demonstration of consistency over time. Trustworthiness is a demonstration of consistency over time. And a lot of people, because of the westernized perspective of just emotional attachment, they're emotionally attached. And a lot of people have the false impression and the false idea that trust is built when they communicate intimate things to the other person.
I used to think that, wait, oh my gosh.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. And that is not by definition trust.
Yeah.
You have just entrusted things into this person's hands, into this person's arms, entrusting things about yourself to them without you actually verifying their trustworthiness, observing their consistency over time. And so you have this idea of the trustworthiness with no concrete proof of their trustworthiness. And you invest, and then when the person doesn't meet the idea that you have of their trustworthiness, you feel disappointed, you feel hurt.
That tends to happen.
And this comes in many different contexts of relationships. Even on the workplace. You trust people's words, but their history is what really determines their trustworthiness.
Right. So without having that history to rely on, or as you're saying, the history to rely on, you have no right trusting that person. Plain
Again,
and simple.
by objectively, history is what determines where one can have a very good reference of character. Character is not communicated with great oratory. You can define someone's character by their history. Yeah. And actually, if you look at the scriptures, for those of us who are believers in Christ, if you look at the Bible, that's why the Bible functions in light of God's trustworthiness. There's a claim throughout the entire Bible of how trustworthy God is because of his history of consistency. So for the person who is just born, understanding and looking at the history in that book, you know for certain that you're dealing with someone who is trustworthy.
Right.
Yeah, and even so, if you even look at the scriptures before, this is something that's actually misunderstood in Christian arenas. Again, because of an erroneous definition of trust, it is not objective. It's what they may have been taught in their environment and their culture and their relationships in their circles. You've been taught that faith in this context is just believing or entrusting yourself unto God. But if you look at the entire scriptures, that is not trust. In the Bible, and I challenge anybody who's a student of the Bible to go through the Bible and you realize that before God actually holds you responsible to what he's saying, he always demonstrates it. That's why you notice in the narrative with regards to the children of Israel in the wilderness, he demonstrated his power before he held them responsible to what he said, to the agreement. Even now, in the New Testament, in the New Covenant, you come into Christ and you experience the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. It's demonstrated first. He gives you something to trust.
Not accident, just to throw your trust in without a valid reason.
That is not trust. History, identifying consistency over time. That is what you're using to identify trust. It's an again westernized perspectives of that. Right. So if you're dealing with someone that is actually concealing their intentions, that's a red flag.
Time to
Right?
hit the road, Jack. Don't come back no more.
Right? And sometimes the persons that you may be doing with who are doing it intentionally, because what they're actually trying to do is to gain psychological control over you. The more you don't know, the more you have to look towards them to know, and that's a form of validation.
As we go along, I think there's a common theme so far that we could safely identify, and that's deception. And as we go along, I'm realizing the more you can identify these things is the more you can make decisions to separate yourself from it. Because you can't separate yourself from it if you're identifying with it. Or like making reasons to say, well, he, she, or whatever it is, didn't know, or, they're naive.
Right.
You may be sitting along in that pool of deceit with them. And so friendships come in, friendships go in, and you're experiencing the same thing over and over. It's because of these same things that you mentioned in here.
Yeah. 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 So, well, that goes without saying. Self-existently, you want to approach that by becoming, again, exercise of personal responsibility. If this person is not showing transparency, that's not someone you want to entrust yourself to at all. Right? And you may be dealing with persons who may understand and may have been educated on the psychological laws. You're experiencing that, that's a red flag. That person is not necessarily your friend.
No.
They are keeping you in smoke so that they can control the situation and actually manipulating your investment of trust. Here's our next law.
Go ahead.
Are you dealing with people who always say less than necessary?
Oh, ja. We say
Right?
less
So
than necessary.
when you are trying, so this is what it says here. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear, and the less in control. Even if you're saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. Now, at first glance, you may read that and you may say that's something good. Yeah, but because even King Solomon says, even the fool, when he's quiet, is considered wise. But if you're actually dealing with someone who you may be dealing with someone in a relationship, whether it's family, friends, your romantic significant other, or even your husband or your wife, who may be applying this law in particular. Now, I'm not saying everybody here is actually malevolently applying this, even though there are persons who are doing that. But you may be encountering persons who would actually take this and apply it intentionally, where it's just a facade to demonstrate their lack of knowledge. So they say less, because when you say less, it's actually again, if it is applied intentionally, it's an action applied to give you the impression that they are all wise. Now, all of these laws that we're speaking about, these laws of psychological control, if you just allow time to pass, just apply the objective law of trustworthiness, consistency of time, If you just apply that over time, all of these laws will be highlighted. Sorry, not these laws. All of these intentions here will be made clear. Most persons fall into these traps because they actually trust someone with a wrong with the definition that we just spoke about, where they think because of the emotional attachment they can entrust to people entrust themselves and entrust intimate things to this person, not actually applying objective definition of trust. And if you actually allow these persons, allow anybody to demonstrate that over time, you will be able to see through all of these things.
So I'm considering what you're saying in an intimate relationship, right? Because as you said, King Solomon identified it as a context applying to talking, right?
Right?
And when you should say minimal. In the context of like an intimate connection or even a friendship, the mere fact that you actually taking this law, this approach, means that you are attempting to get the image of something that you are not. Because people tend to say less when they try to come across like mysterious or more profound or something like that.
Yeah.
Which means that you're in a very subtle manner trying to deceive the other party. And where you're trying to build a friendship with someone or an intimate relationship with another person, the silence is is deceitful.
No,
Because
and silence with the intention of giving that impression is deceitful.
right, not
Because
mere silence. Because I mean,
on the other hand, someone who is self-existent, according to King Solomon and the
mm,
and even Yeshua, Jesus and his disciples, someone who is self-existent is somebody who is who has knowledge, and the person who has knowledge is not someone to put or to impose their knowledge upon others. Because the self-existent person respects the right of self-existence of every other person around them, which means sometimes to impose or to interject with your knowledge is actually showing disrespect to the self-existent right of another person,
yeah, it is.
where you are technically indirectly saying that they are ignorant.
So that's
If you
like soliciting, um,
unsolicited advice, yes,
unsolicited. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
unsolicited advice is disrespectful. What you are indirectly saying is that this person is ignorant, and you are assuming authority to train and instruct them, to teach them. The person who is self-existent increases knowledge. And if you're respecting someone self-existently, you do not offer information until it is requested.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
On the other hand, and again, if you just allow this over time, abandon the westernized perspective of trustworthiness and apply objectively what trustworthiness is, observation of consistency over time, you would easily reveal the person who is manipulating you with this very easily, because
It will come out.
with sufficient time they are going to have to technically support their facade of being all-knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. See how simple that is?
Yeah, it's plain and simple. And I understand what you're saying because I mean, the unsolicited advice part used to bug me. I mean, a few years ago, I was in a situation where someone was just constantly packing down my throat information that I didn't request, which obviously made me feel like what I was acting upon was basically what they were doing was coming across like they were loading the
Right.
information without it being solicited. And a few years ago, I found myself in a situation with that, and I felt like this thing is bugging me, and I couldn't put my finger on why and what it is
Right.
until
Right.
further down the road, I realized that I realized because I experienced it for myself, it's disrespectful unless that person agreed with you to, unless you have a relationship where you have an agreement where I could share and you could share.
Exactly. And persons, you find that persons who do that, they do that in pursuit of personal validation
Ah,
because they want to be seen as someone who is knowledgeable. That's just the opposite of the person who is always saying less than necessary.
that comes across arrogant.
Both are arrogant. Just two different sides of the spectrum, two different sides of the facade to hide their desire for personal validation, their insecurity about what they know and what they don't know.
Hmm.
Here's our next law that is also used. This one says, so much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. So listen to this one. Reputation is the cornerstone of power. Through reputation alone, you can intimidate and win. Once it slips, you are now vulnerable and will be attacked on all sides. Make your reputation unassailable. Always be alert to potential attacks and thwart them away and thwart them before they happen. Learn to destroy enemies by opening holes in their own reputation. And stand aside and let public opinion hang them.
So that's like taking a sword and stabbing it through someone just so that you could look better than them.
Now, if your reference point for your personal validation is reputation, you have just become a potential victim of someone who is doing this. I want to say that again because a lot of people, because of that sense of personal validation, they want a sense of reputation. They want to be known. And instead of actually doing what is necessary self-existently, they pursue the fruit and not the root. So if your personal reference point is how people's idea of you and that image that you're trying to give everybody, the person who wants to destroy you or manipulate you will be the person that will seek to damage your reputation. So they will do things in a very meticulous and strategic manner that reveals how great they are, and then stand and poke holes in what you think that you're trying to actually establish with regards to reputation, how you want people to see you. And once they identify that, they can poke holes in that and destroy what
So
you
you're
think
saying,
that you actually trying to give everybody the impression of.
so you're saying that this can come across in ways like where they try to bring you down, or is that what you're saying, that they'll try to identify, well, you're incompetent in this area, or find reasons
Yes,
to
yes.
pull you down so
So
that they
people,
can lift,
go ahead.
themselves.
Exactly. So how does this apply in a relationship? You may be in situations where, let's say, for example, let's say in regards to romantic relationships or even in marriage, this person, what this person is really seeking is recognition. And so what they will do is through their own stratagem, through their own strategy, systematically do things to demonstrate that they are this. They're systematically doing it. And what they're systematically doing is not by mutual agreement. It is not coming from the objective perspective of a relationship where there is a communication of expectations that is mutually taken on as promises to inspire each other in the connection. What the person does is identify what they can do to make themselves look good, and they will do that. Now, people do this maliciously, and then some of us, because of a desire to feel validated, or whatever you have been taught is your reference point for personal validation and self-approval, you do the same thing where you meet your own list. And when you meet your own list, you now watch your partner as though you are justified, and you begin to poke holes in their reputation. Or you may be dealing with someone who is actually meeting their list. This is very common in religious circles, by the way, where depending on the denomination that these people come from and they belong to, the denomination will say this is what a good man is and a good woman is. A good woman does this, does this, does this, does this, does this, does that. And so you enter the relationship without communication of mutual expectations. Without mutual agreement on each other's expectations. And you make sure that you meet in this list that you have. And what you really have is a relationship with the list. You don't have a relationship with your partner. And so you meet the list and you stand there validated and approved. And then you begin to point out and poke holes in how they are at fault.
I see.
How they are lacking. And
Right.
how you have been doing this. And what they're doing. What are you doing? And then when issues arise, you say, I'm a good man. I'm a good woman. And you're going and you're spreading that to your boyfriend, to your male friends and your female friends. I'm a good woman. And this time you have a relationship with your list of rules. You don't have a relationship with that person.
So in that case,
you have abandoned that relationship with that person. And you have a personal, ego-driven relationship going on. You fall into self-righteousness.
So in that case, basically trying to boost your own reputation and to protect your own ego.
That's exactly it.
Well, I mean, that is total opposite to what actual relationships supposed to be, like in equity, where, as you say, the reference point for what is a good man or good woman, as the case may be in intimate relationships, will be what you both agreed to in the beginning.
Yeah.
And conducting yourself within the connection, considering always the other party and not trying to come across better.
Exactly. So
So
in that case, there's mutual inspiration.
right.
And then what is actually built is trust, intimacy. Right? So if you're in a relationship with someone who is actually doing that, they're focusing on their reputation. You may have family members also. I know I've actually dealt with that even in my personal life, where family members study these things and focus on reputation and do things to show everybody according to the criteria that they have established for themselves as to what a man or a woman is. They use the societal validation and they actually work and put that there, and then they stand up there and they watch everybody else or the persons that they're trying to gain manipulative control over, and they begin to compare that person to their own criteria. And if you are not aware of what your reference point is, if you are not aware as to or comfortable in your validation self-existently, people like that will take whatever you think that you're validating, they understand that you're validating yourself on, and they will use it.
Right.
To swing your left or to swing your right.
Following. Yeah.
Says non-believers. So Valen says non-believers use that against believers. If you are a good Christian, you will be like this or do this. Yeah. That's just another form of the same thing. Yeah. So they have a personal idea as to what this is supposed to be, and they're holding you responsible to it. People do that in marriages and destroy their marriages. Some people now, for those of you who may be in relationships where persons study this and they're doing it systematically, this is your wake-up call. You are not validated by what that person establishes as what is necessary for you to be approved in the relationship. The agreement between the man and the woman is what approves the relationship. People do that even with societal norms. So they have societal norms that actually say that a good woman is supposed to do this. And you see them all on social media saying, I am a good woman. According to who?
And these a lot of these women circles.
A good man, according to who?
A lot in these women circles, they have a lot of flippant stuff that they use for these reference points of what a good woman, good wife, good mother does. You have things like the type of schooling, the the home that you live in, or the type of car, how much activities she engages her kids in. There's a lot
Yeah,
of nonsense
yeah,
that
yeah,
women use to compare themselves with to determine who is actually the outstanding mom, outstanding woman of the year.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's very nonsensical.
Yeah. And so with that present, let's now identify what is the self-existent approach. If you're in a relationship with someone and you are functioning self-existently as is Christ in you,
Hmm.
and you're respecting everybody's right of self-existence, then your reputation, all of those external reference points, has to be removed. They have to be
Exactly.
removed because using that as your reference point is really manipulation of the individual that you're dealing with. And if you're experiencing that, we encourage you right now to stop and reorientate your validation, your personal validation. You may be being held responsible to that person's definition and criteria for your personal validation. And even as believers, as Valen saying here,
That's Vince.
or Vialen, Vince, blessings, bro, blessings, bro. Let's get the Valen there. Yeah, so they thought Kimi was Vincent, now, but I'm watching Valen. Well, anyway. Yeah. So you may be in a relationship where this person actually holding you responsible, and because of that, you have been tricked because of a lack of, or because of your own mental codependency. You've been tricked into thinking that whatever that person establishes as your validation, that you have to meet it. And so because of your sense of lack based on what they're saying, you now become the slave to the every word and to the every assertion.
Yep.
If you're experiencing that, what you will also be experiencing is a sense of emptiness. Eventually you start to get depressed.
And you
Or
feel burned out.
you're going to feel burnt out emotionally, definitely. And then with long-term exposure to that, the next thing you know is that somebody is telling you that you're bipolar. Because, and that whole idea of bipolar is really, pay attention, where you are actually trying to live from your heart. You have something that you're experiencing in your heart, and you're actually trying to meet the criteria that has been put there to validate who you are. So they say bipolar, but really what you're struggling with is the image according to the reference point, to the external reference point, and what you're really experiencing in your heart. And so they might say bipolar because the image actually says, what do you mean? Christians fall into this category, where they use the church rules as to what validates them as a believer. And then they get to the point where they just explode with what they're really thinking in their heart, and the psychologist watching and say and diagnose it bipolar. No, that's the psychologist's way of saying what the psychologist says bipolar, but self-existently, according to self-existent mechanics of your spirit, you're just living in self-hypocrisy that you need to stop. And so you may be in relationships where people are actually doing this, and because you have not identified that you are validated by the spirit within, based on your external reference point, you feel like you actually have to meet that person's criteria to be a good spouse. people use that. A lot of people find themselves in relationships where the spouse is manipulating them by giving them that sense that they're not validated. And then they give you criteria to work for so that you can get their love.
Even in familiar relationships amongst family,
Watch me. It's
family
very,
have,
very prevalent there. Go ahead.
but they have their own reference points of how someone should live a good life. And if you don't know what is breathed into you and how to function from that, then you'd feel the exhaustion of trying to meet or having to stand up or fight against what they think you should be doing with your life. A lot of people experience that.
Watch me.
What
What?
job they think you should have, or what school you should attend,
Yes.
or what career you should
Yes.
choose.
Yeah. And some of us actually do that with even um your normal life, where there's something in particular that you're using as your external point of validation. You're referencing it all the time and you're pursuing it. Some of us may not be doing it in relationships, but you're spending your life pursuing what you think you lack, which is a separate topic outside of the whole idea of reputation. But on the topic of reputation, what you are actually using to validate yourself, maybe what you're actually imposing upon your spouse, and you are building your reputation within family relationships. I encountered it even in my personal circles, and people actually get to the point where they are intent on showing themselves to be better than you, and so they get to that point. And in some cases, you can actually have a reasonable conversation with persons like that. In other cases, you just simply need to walk away from that relationship,
Yeah.
because to have a relationship requires sincerity of heart, and where persons are actually intentionally doing that to try to control you, that's not someone you want to be investing trust into. And if you have no trustworthiness, then the relationship is all in your mind.
Objectively.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So when you see the person trying to lift their reputation over yours, trying to make themselves come out to look better, friendship, boss, employee, whomever it is, intimate connections, time to hit the road.
Yeah. And what you're experiencing there, what you may be doing, is the same thing that you don't even know. It's the same thing that the Adam did in the Garden of Eden. He pursued what he thought he lacked outside of himself, and that caused the entire human conundrum. And so
Which is
some
what
people may understand this on the work site. I encourage each and every one of you listening to this and who will be listening to this, have no confusion. There are people who study the psychological laws and apply them methodically. If you're dealing with someone who may be doing it because of their own personal selfishness, but their heart is sincere, then those are relationships that you can hold on to. But for persons who study this with the intent of doing that, you don't want to hold on to those relationships. You are in a relationship with someone who has no good intentions for you.
they've made up their mind on deceit.
They have made up their mind that they want control, and the control is basically their self-importance worshipped. Is this making sense?
Yeah, I like how the music ended with that one when you said it. Yeah.
Yeah. Holy girl. I think that's Tonya.
Tanya.
Tonya saying
Yes.
living outside her father would be
Well,
so tiresome. Yeah.
Well, that was a lucky guess. I think it's Tanya.
Yeah, I think that's Tonya.
Lori says, yeah, it's exhausting. Sure is.
Yeah. So in relationships in particular, if you are in a relationship where you are pursuing that, I encourage you to stop. Self-existently, you want to identify that you are validated by the spirit within you, and therefore you are not pursuing that person's criteria. The only option on the table is to sit hear each other's expectations, have mutual agreement on each other's expectations. If there is no mutual agreement on each other's expectations, then there is no connection. The negotiation is over. Some of us actually hold on to relationships in spite of this person's actually opening up, in spite of the person their assertion of their reputation or their self-righteousness in the relationship. Yeah. So if you encounter persons who actually study this and doing it, that's a different category of evil. Those persons you want to X out. They are on malicious intent. Right? Psychologists call them narcissists.
Okay, check it out. Have so much information on it online, and they have so much things that help you identify whether or not you're dealing with a person who's narcissistic. Yeah.
and if you are doing that, I strongly encourage you to stop. Stop. Because you are destroying your relationship. As a matter of fact, the moment you began to walk self-righteously by your own criteria, you have abandoned the relationship. And the relationship is in decadence. So we encourage you to take the self-existent approach. Mutual agreement. Heart to heart.
So what's the next law that we're going to look at?
Next law says court attention at all costs. Everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. Never let yourself get lost in the crowd. Then, or burned or buried in oblivion, stand out, be conspicuous at all costs. Make yourself a magnet of attention by appearing larger, more colorful, more mysterious than the bland and timid masses. So there's good and bad to that. There's good and bad to that. Where, well, this in particular is actually a law of power, right? Again, there's another law of power where you present what you are not. Again, if you're dealing with someone who is doing this, always doing things to gain attention, and then they're comparing you to their awesomeness, and using the awesomeness as though the attention that they have, they're using it as a means of validation. All you need to do is to just ease back and allow that. Apply objective trustworthiness. Watch them over time, and the emptiness will be revealed. Go ahead.
I was thinking the mere fact that you have to try and attract attention to yourself, it goes to show that you are actually trying to make a show, or put on a show, which is something false, because it's like a facade. And
exactly.
At the end, the only one who's going to look stupid is the person who is trying to draw all the attention at all costs, because making yourself a magnet of attention also puts you on the line for a lot of discrimination, because you're bringing all the attention on you.
Yeah. And
it's very selfish.
And when you do that, persons who are doing that, if you are experiencing someone around you who is doing that and they are comparing you, and they're actually wholly responsible to have the attention that they have, or not to have the attention that they have, but they're actually using it as a reference to show how they are better than you. You want to reconsider that relationship. And by the way, that's massively codependent. Again, they actually go, and this is actually what people who are codependent do. People who may be using this maliciously, that's what they do. They're really trying to hide their personal incompetencies, their personal sense of insecurity. So they're using these things as reference points. And the moment that you begin to look at it and feel and actually fall into the trap of being validated by the attention that you have to is the moment you've come under the spell of the psychological control and the psychological power.
Right. The whole comparing thing is just plain deceitful and evil.
It is. It is.
'Cause-
Sorry, you want to say something?
no, I was gonna say it's like it is where there's comparison. The person who is comparing, who is the one attempting to compare, what you're indirectly trying to say is that I am better than you, or
Right.
look at me. They're using themselves or what they're doing as if it were, all, and their comparison is just based on their own little world and their own little experiences.
Exactly. So if you are actually experiencing you're in a relationship where someone is always looking for attention, they're always putting themselves in a position where they could be seen and people can think about them in a particular way and say things about them. And then they now begin to compare you. They're actually using that as personal validation and then they're looking down at you.
Mm-hmm.
Do not fall. How do you deal with something like that? First of all, we want to consider that a self-existent person does not seek attention. The self-existent person, in the words of King Solomon, the self-existent man increases knowledge.
Yeah.
And in increasing knowledge, he increases his ability to function. He increases his scope of functionality. And where he increases the scope of functionality, people will naturally be drawn to that as a fruit of functionality. So if you're actually seeing someone who always is looking for attention and they're not functioning, you don't want to be like that person. You don't want to ever fall into the trap of feeling that you are lesser. And people who are manipulative and want to manipulate you and control you and gain psychological power over you, they will always court attention, always looking for attention, for people to see them. And then they will look down, then they treat you with a sense of condescension so that they can show themselves better than you. It's all a facade.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you want to actually identify it, just step back and watch the tree manifest its fruit. And I guarantee you that situations, that's how the law of sowing and reaping is. They sow that, just give them time to reap it. And when they have found themselves in a position where they cannot support all the attention that they're actually pursuing so feverishly, before pride, before destruction, pride comes. And pride is always a facade.
Mm-hmm.
It's always something that you are not. Yeah?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? So if you're dealing with someone who's actually, again, who's doing this methodically, you may want to reconsider your relationship with such individuals. You may be encountering persons who, a little selfish and they like the attention. Even in that case, we encourage you to not fall into the trap of doing that. It's the self-existent man, the person who is self-existent. Do not focus. Persons who are self-existent do not focus on attention. They focus on functionality. And that is like a tree that all birds in the garden will come to. It is a fruit of that root. If you seek the fruit without the root, shame will be your portion. Just in a matter of time.
Before you go to the next
Go ahead.
law, I wanted to identify something that's with respect to the courting attention at all costs. Sometimes, there's a side of it also, or a part of it. I saw that there was a part of it where people who try to court the attention or try to make themselves seem larger than life or shine in a particular way, which is a false shining. Because if you're not functioning, you're trying to bring the shine on you. You're trying to use a flashlight or something,
Yeah.
the sun. And I even see that with certain persons who hold leadership positions where they try to create an awe, a false awe around them. And a lot of people are attracted to it, thinking, it's the mystery and all these things is attractive.
Yeah.
But what they're actually doing is deceitfully attempting to dress themselves in what they are not.
The self-existent sons always follow the function, and not those who just looking to create a sense of attention around them.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you can easily identify them very easily. And if you're actually dealing with someone who is doing that, again, we encourage you reevaluate that connection. That is not a friend. That is someone who is trying to sink you so that they can have a sense of superiority. And if you are doing that, we encourage you again, reconsider what you're doing. Invest in functionality, increase knowledge, invest in functionality, and let that speak on its own. That is what Yeshua did. He functioned. That spoke on its own.
For real.
Yeah. So next, let's take a look at our next law. Law of power, of psychological power. How many of you are actually dealing with individuals, or does this sound familiar with your experience with someone around you, or even in your relationship, your marriage? Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Use the wisdom, knowledge, and legwork of other people to further your own cause. Not only will such assistance save you valuable time and energy, it will give you a godlike aura of efficiency and speed. In the end, your helpers will be forgotten and you will be remembered. Never do yourself what others can do for you. What do you think about that, Loki?
I think this whole thing is just built upon plain manipulation and deceit.
Hmm.
And the mere fact that you're getting others to do the work for you, I mean, and then you take the credit at the end, that is that is like, I mean, plain out simple as lying. And even if you're in the work, I've seen that happen already in the corporate arena, where people will be working as a team, and then when the results come out, all of a sudden you see the one or two bosses start to pat their backs and stand up and shine and
Yeah.
diminish all the efforts that everybody else collectively put together to make it happen. In environments like that, that's very toxic.
Yeah.
That's very toxic.
Yeah. I have experienced also people like that, again, who find themselves in a self-importance. And what they do by getting you to do it is literally an attempt to lord their self-importance over you so that they can see that you are doing their work for them. It's a pharaoh mentality that they have.
Oh,
A pharaoh mentality where they can sit down above, and because you might think that you're helping them genuinely, and they're actually looking at it as they are supreme over you, and you actually doing their menial work.
mm-hmm.
How many of us have experienced something like that? Comment in the chat. They
What
treat you. Go ahead.
what should be taking place is that credit is given where it is in where the time and energy is invested, and equity established and maintained across the board. Even if you have different positions in any workplace, um, you're not a one man team
Right.
unless you literally are doing everything for yourself.
Yeah.
But that in itself is just being power hungry.
Yeah. It's also. Tanya says yes. Yeah. So you're in a relationship with in a And this takes place with even in, well, on the corporate, in the corporate world. This is a law that is very much used to control others, and it's intentionally done because it is studied. It is
Right.
intentionally done to be able to maintain control, psychological control over the workforce. In relationships, marriages, you'll find that in marriages, there are people who may be in marriages with persons who also do that. They will not get involved in the activity. They'll have other persons do it. And then because they mentioned it, they give you no credence, no recognition for what was done, because to them, they were the one that came up with the idea. So they take exclusive right over the recognition. Right? There are other cases where I have also then dealt with cases where people like that would involve you, and when they're involving you in it, they're involving you in a way where they might tell you, hey, I'll do this and I'll give you something, and the mere fact that they actually giving you money makes them feel superior over you, and they begin to be condescending. And what they've literally done is swindled you. Is a very subtle form of swindling you into being their employee. And then they begin to lord that over you. And you may be doing that innocently because you think that you're actually helping them, and they're using that to damage your reputation or to make you look, to spread that, to show you as though, look at him, he's working for me now.
Right.
It's again a mentality that comes from insecurity, emptiness. So persons actually do these things to try to gain control. And for most persons, if you are not self-existent and they have identified that your reference point for personal validation is money, they will have you like a dog.
Yeah.
They will work that like a dog and get you to do whatever they want. Some people might just come and say, wash my car for me now, I'll give you something. And because or do this for me now, and I'll give you something.
Right.
Because
and
they
then
know
they
it's,
turn it around.
and then what they do is actually they find your reference point if you're not self-existent, and they feed it. And the next thing you know is because they now gain a sense of psychological superiority over you, and you even begin to feel, because of the control that they have done, you begin to feel as though they are greater than you and you are lacking in comparison to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen that happen. They give you like these little tasks, and at the end of the day, they use themselves as a point of comparison and make it come across like you're actually dependent on them, because they're trying to tap into that control factor there. And in that attempt, they may actually try to make you feel inferior. And that's where they have the control.
Yes. Tanya says so mean to do that to others. Tanya, I think mean is a massive understatement. It is dark. It is evil. Right? And so they actually gain that control, and the next thing you know is because they have actually caused you by using your own reference point. They've used you and they cause you to become their servant and their slave. And so they're using your intelligence, your skill sets. And because they're actually throwing a reference point at you, you go after it, and then you become their slave. And then they will go now and actually discredit your dignity and actually show you as incompetent because you can't do it on your own. You working for them.
All right.
Yeah, I've had family members do that, and it was because of my understanding of these laws, and now even more so understanding the law of the self-existent, but understanding these laws through the works of those works, ancient works of the Chinese and so on, understanding that, I was able to identify them and identify that they really studied. In some cases, persons studied it, and they had no idea that I studied it. I studied it years, a decade before them, and they methodically were applying it to gain control. And I was like, wow, these are not relationships you want to hold on to. Holding on to people like that is actually literally holding on to darkness.
Yeah, those relationships to work.
And in darkness, there is only demons.
More darkness.
Yeah, that only multiplies. And so if you're in a marriage or in a relationship that when you're experiencing that, I strongly encourage you to, one, reassess your reference point. Reassess your reference point. Because persons are, these kind of people who do this will be people who actually are using what you are validating on to their advantage, so that they can maintain image over you, and they will begin to treat you as though you are a vagrant, as though you are subject to their power and to their control. Yeah. And if you are doing that, we strongly encourage you to reevaluate your intentions, because what you're doing is actually oppressing another self-existent individual. The self-existent person, first of all, does not take advantage of others. The self-existent individual respects the self-existent dignity of every other person.
Equity for all.
Equity is the law of the self-existent person. Equity for all, which means whatever they contributed, they should be recognized for what they contributed, and it should be attributed to them. And the praise should be attributed to the person that actually did that. And if you're not doing that, then right now you're functioning like a Satan. And you're oppressing others for your self-benefit.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's take a look at this another law. There's another law. It says here, make other people come to you. Yeah. Use bait if necessary. And here what it says, when you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. Right? Which is exactly what took place with Eve in the garden. He forced the woman subtly, placed in a position of validation, and he became Lord.
Right.
The serpent became their father. You see, and people actually understand this law and they apply it methodically. So it says, when you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. It is always better to make your opponent come to you, abandoning his own plans in the process. Lure him with fabulous gains, then attack. You hold the cards.
So the fabulous.
Go ahead.
So the fabulous gains here, maybe just the person feeding your reference points. So if it's things, material things that you like, or expensive dates, whatever it is, they will lure you with that, get you familiar and accustomed, and then attack.
What they will do is actually simple things where they allow you to handle the things. Now, watch me. I even experienced that, and I watched that, and people don't, and the person wasn't even aware as to how ridiculous they seemed. But this is also used for psychological control over others, where the person would actually get you. Now, you may be innocent and think that you're going to help them. But what they will systematically do, and I encourage those of you who are actually listening to this to pay attention to what's going on in your life, because if they're persons who are actually familiar with the psychological laws of power, they'll be using it on you to gain control over you. And those are not relationships that you want to have. These people are actually using your sense of trust and your sincerity to be of assistance and enslaving you. Right? So what they will literally do is they will have you come to them.
Right. That's control.
Right. So what they want you to do is to actually, they will try to push you to do things that they want you to do, or they will call you out of your plan for the day or your schedule to do these things. And what they're actually doing is playing us on your sense of codependency, your sense of lack of personal governance over your affairs. So when they call you to do things where you have to leave what you're doing, they consider that a sense of psychological control, where you abandon what you're doing to come and help them. And you might think it's help, but what they're literally doing is actually playing upon your codependency that does not allow you to say no. Because they know that you have a problem saying no, they will call you and get you involved in that, and they're actually controlling you after that. Go ahead.
So it's basically they're in the name of help, making you their servant. So whereas you think you're actually doing something, that's just saying you are now.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
Well, it's not only in the name of help, but really for a lot of people, because of the familial cultures that they come from, because of the emotional connection that they have to the person, their familial culture, or what they were taught relationships are, would actually tell them, has actually taught them that for the person that they connected to, that they shouldn't say no.
Yeah.
And so they're using that to validate their own sense of worth in the connection and in the relationship. And because they're actually doing that, persons like that, I have had family members who tried that many times. So I know this by experience. And again, they had no idea that I was familiar with this kind of material. So I was able to cite it immediately. And so what they will literally do is come because of your desire to show yourself to be a person who values the relationship. They will pull you out. And so they're playing on your sense of validation and using it to their advantage. So that by doing that, you feel like they have actually put you in a position where they are validating your presence in the relationship, and they will use it against you if you say no. And if you actually are validated by not saying no, by always being there, they will actually pull it up and use it and say, and actually use it as a point of comparison to say that you have never helped them. And what they're literally doing is actually trying to enslave you to their purposes and enslave you to have a sense of superiority over you, so that by abandoning what you're doing, you're actually showing that they are important. It's just feeding their self-importance.
Right.
And in some cases, they will actually have you handle the things that are valuable, that they consider valuable. So they'll have you drive they have you drive yourself to the point where whatever they call upon you, you are doing whatever they want of you, and whatever is valuable to them, like their most precious possessions. Because of that, they'll have you handle it so that you can actually have further dependence on them, because by their psychological control, what they are allowing you to do is to cause you now to look at them as somebody great. So anytime you have a situation, because you are handling this and they've actually have you handling it to give you to manipulate you into looking at them as a person of wealth or a person of great importance. And those same persons around me, they stood up, what you mean, oblivious, thinking that they're so intelligent, and stood up there and will ask you, so why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you come to me for this? Why didn't you come to me for that? That is not your friend. That is not an ally. That is your enemy.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Have you experienced that?
I've experienced that, not with things, but with someone did that to me with their children, because that was their most prized possession.
Right.
And they would have me oversee the care of the children, and as if it was something, I should have felt honored. And they used the same tactics of calling me out of my routine without giving me sufficient time to think,
Right.
to come to assist with whatever they claim that they need assistance with. And at the end, it wasn't me assisting them. It was basically um, they were using me or the bait as a trap. I saw
Right.
someone wrote an overview, and they stated something here, which which I realized is something purely manipulative. They said aggressive action is not the effective action. So by doing that over time, they're not taking a fully aggressive approach. Most often, the most effective action is to stay back, keep calm, and let others be frustrated by the traps you lay for them,
Right.
playing for long term power instead of a quick victory, which is like a build up. This takes place over time. Probably it might take a year, because the people who apply these psychological power, laws of power on you, seem to be very patient people with this, because
Yeah.
they have a plan, and so they expect the plan to work. So
No,
they're
well,
patient.
it's not only patience, it's just their desire to have their self-importance and their self-worth fed.
Yeah.
So people who are actually seeking that will do what is necessary. They don't have integrity.
Right.
Yeah. And they always look for what you're tying your self-worth to.
Mm-hmm.
They
That's a good point.
well, that is exactly what they're using. And if you're
So,
not self-existent, the self-existent person does not tie their self-worth to anything external. The self-existent
no.
person is actually functioning from the spirit. Their self-worth is by the spirit within them. Right?
So if they know that your self worth is tied to like the care of your children, for example, someone like that will be able to identify it and use that. And then what the person in my case did is started to have their kids interact with my kids, so that they knew at that point I wasn't walking in self existence. So they knew that my reference point was children. And
Right.
so they played upon it.
And they're using it for their own advantages.
Mm-hmm.
So people who actually use these psychological laws of power, they're always drawn to a person who they seem to easily to manipulate. They don't have a sense of self-worth, and they don't have a sense of personal security. Because someone who is actually has personal security will not just do what they call upon to do. They would assess whether that's possible or not. If it's not possible, they'll tell you, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. So they will
Yeah.
look for persons who they can manipulate, the persons who they can blame and who they can victimize. People who actually need other people to validate them. Those are the people that will fall into the trap of psychological laws of power. You're looking for persons to validate you. You will easily fall into psychological laws of power and be abused. And when you're being abused, sometimes you may feel helpless. Their control over you makes you feel worthless. Yeah, you may feel a sense of abandonment where they don't give you and your life any importance, because they consider what they're doing as important, and they consider that what you're doing is not important,
Yeah,
is
where the guilt
worthless.
trip you.
Yeah, they have actually a need for power and control over others so that they can feel like they have some self-worth, because in essence what they're doing there is really trying, they are scavengers for their own sense of lack of self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
So they will be willing to put their feelings always over the well-being of others. And when you confront these people, the first thing that they will do is either get aggressive or cry. If you start to begin to highlight their abuse, like methodically, they're going to get very defensive, or either they get very defensive, or they go to the next side of the spectrum, or both. They get defensive first, and then they go to the next side of the spectrum, and they begin to cry.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really sad.
So if you're actually experiencing things like that, like you're dealing with people like that, and they're shrinking from responsibility in the connection, but and trying and actually working with these laws of control and power. They're not responsible to the relationship. They're showing no personal responsibility to the relationship, but they're always there with their little criteria, and they have you working towards feeling validated and approved for their love and for their relationship. You need to actually pull yourself square.
And ignoring when you bring up issues on the table too.
But that's what it is. They're actually shrinking from responsibility. They show no responsibility over the connection. You actually have to meet their long list of criteria. That's not somebody you want to be in a relationship with. They will actually deny. They'll make promises and never keep them. Always making promises and never keep them. Because you have to actually meet their criteria so that they can feel worthy. It's really, those things are not relationships. It's actually slavery. This person is actually demonstrating a sense of lordship in the connection. Another common factor here is where you begin to question, they begin to guilt trip you. You see why being self-existent and functioning self-existently is important? Because if you're not functioning self-existently, you cannot have a framework to identify nor actually stop what is taking place.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
they'll always guilt trip you, and when you bring up a problem, it's never addressed. They will take those situations and always swing it around as to how they feel. So you expressing how you feel in the connection, and they will always use it as an opportunity to swing it around, to express or to give priority to what they feel. So you never get your problems addressed. And another thing is that they will never really come out and tell you what they're experiencing. You always have to figure it out.
Which is what you were mentioning a while ago, the idea of being transparent is out of the picture for someone like that. Because their intent, we really think about it. If the whole intention behind, all these psychological things is power and control, which is deceit, because it's not establishing that what is good for you is good for me, then they will never be open about how they think and feel. And when they do, they will treat it as if, well, they are the most important person on the planet.
Exactly. So they wouldn't actually communicate, not use their words. Always a sense of darkness where you have to figure out things. And they always tell you things like, you're supposed to You should know that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is
Oh, you
actually
didn't
being said
notice.
exactly. So you didn't notice this? You didn't notice
Yeah.
that? And all these things in the absence of an actual agreement. So you're being held responsible to what, to their expectations, and you don't even know what the expectations are.
That's the
Here,
thing. If you
here's
don't
another.
know,
Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say if you don't know what the expectations are, then technically you have no place there because you'll be held accountable to their feelings, and that can fluctuate. That will fluctuate.
Yeah, yeah. So here's another one that is also used as a psychological rule. Sorry, a psychological law of control, of power. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To, main, to
Um,
maintain to maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. That sound familiar?
yeah, I've that one in particular where people I've seen that where people try to so like the weaker ones. I call them the weaker because depending on where there are people who have reached a certain place in their life where they just need a little boost to come out of whatever they're in.
Yeah.
And those who are in a position to help sometimes instead of actually rendering assistance to support the person's self existence, they would give very sparingly, intentionally, to keep the person within their reach so that they
Right.
can maintain that power over them. I mean,
Right.
all of these are saying that relationships like those are no place to be, whether it's familial or intimate, or the more we go through some of them, is the more dark I realize it is.
So
It's
so
no place to be.
and this not the end of it. It says to maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are depended on, the more freedom you have, the more liberty you have. Make people depend on you for their joy and their prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach
Again,
them, never instruct them, or give them enough information so that they can do without you. If you have, is anybody here experience relationships like that? If you're experiencing relationships like that, you're being manipulated. The person is actually doing just the bare minimum so that you can always look towards them. When basically is another form of tricking you
mm-hmm.
into being validated by them. So you always have to come to them for the information to know what to do. Yeah, people also use this again in marriages, romantic relationships, and family, where they wouldn't really spend time mutually educating so that both parties can function self-existently and they can be inspired love because of their own fear, their own insecurity, their own desire to be loved. They are actually enslaving people to their importance. These people are weak people who do that. They are actually, especially those who do it methodically, these people are very weak and void. They have nothing, no substance in themselves.
I've,
And so they do whatever is necessary to enslave you to their glorification.
under that particular psychological law, I came across some information where people identify other sub keys, or they call them, to power using that same law in particular.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that they identify. The best way to do it is to create a relationship of dependence. Now we may see this sometimes with I've seen this in intimate relationships where they treat it like the person is the master and you are their servant, or you are unable to function, and they keep it in a way where you are always limited. And in a very subtle manner, it may start off, and you may not be able to identify it because what they may use is statements or phrases like, this is in our best interest, or they may pity you, I suppose, and tell you, well, you're gonna make it through. Don't worry, I got your back. I have you. Where what they are trying to do is actually create the upper hand, and
Yeah.
once
Yeah.
once that once that system that they're putting in place comes true, what the person on the other side receiving and doesn't realize is that you have just given your control over your energy to them. Maybe
Yeah,
not unknowingly, but they now have you like strings on a puppet and you can't see the strings.
exactly. And all along in all of these things, what you'd really, what you all you if you are a victim, or you feel like you are you any of the things, these things sound familiar, you'd always feel a sense of questioning yourself all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And always feeling or afraid of feeling that shame and guilt. It's because you're not functioning self-existently. And if you're experiencing people who actually keep you dependent on, or they're doing things like that to keep you dependent on them, again, I encourage you to stop and to assess where you're standing.
Yep.
Because from the principle of self-existently, you should be very much aware as to what you want to stand for. And if you're not aware of what you want to stand for, and you actually have persons around you like that who are doing things so that you can always come to them, whether it's for they may even tell you things like you must that like they always tell you things like, I could always make it happen for you.
Yeah.
Those are common things they will tell you. I could always make it happen for you. I can do this for you. Come to me.
They're keeping the dependency there.
What they are attempting to do, if they have not done it with you already, what they are attempting to do is to actually give you a sense of their superiority, and you actually making this person your god. That
And
is not what you want to do.
it's a sense of false hope, because think about it. If they really wanted to help you, why didn't they do it in the first place?
Exactly.
It's false hope.
Which is why being which is actually, again, if you're using self-existence as a reference point, the self-existent person doesn't actually do anything for you to continue to look towards them. They actually give you freely. They actually help you
Yeah.
to be self-existent, which means if that requires that you are educated, or information in particular is necessary, the adequate information is necessary so that you can begin to function on your own,
Mm-hmm.
then that is what the self-existent person does. They don't give you bits and pieces of information, or they don't actually just give you what what they think you need, so that you can feel a sense of happiness. And people like that will always tend to invite you to do nice things, take you to nice places, and what they're really doing is feeding your codependency.
Yes.
If you have codependency, what they're doing is, in some cases, people may do it in an attempt to try to identify whether there is something that gives you some sense of self-worth, validation. And if they identify that is where your self-worth and your validation is, they will always take you to nice places from time to time, and it's not genuine, it's not sincere. It's really for you to actually be to just give you like giving a dog crumbs. So they will always look towards them so that they can
Mm-hmm.
maintain a sense of superiority in the relationship, whether it's family, friends, romantic relationship, marriage, and even co-workers. They do just enough so that they can feel where they think you are actually using it for your self-worth, and they will manipulate it so that you can actually end up being their servant. And they can always have a sense of glorification, a sense of superiority, superior importance to you. And they will, and again, in those connections, you need to ask yourself some questions. Is the person taking responsibility in the relationship? Are they showing responsibility to the connection? Mutual responsibility.
And responsibility for you in this case also may not be that you have to reciprocate by taking them back to nice places, but
No,
simply the agreement, or
the agreements, expectations.
if they
Are they,
decided
go ahead.
if they decided to insert that there on their own free will, then you are not subjected to it.
Are they responsible to how how you also feel in the relationship? Are they responsible, showing responsibility to your expectations in the connection? If they're showing no responsibility to that, then you are actually being manipulated. Are they making promises? And when it comes on the table, they always find an excuse as to why they can't keep the promise, and does the why is the why always something frivolous as to why they can't keep the promises, but they're holding you responsible to their expectations.
Yeah.
Are you experiencing that? If you are, you're being manipulated, you're being controlled. Are you experiencing when you begin to voice your discomforts and to actually to express how you are feeling any connection, or you have a problem, and they actually turn it around to make you feel guilty for find a way to make you feel guilty for what you're experiencing, or they actually take what you're saying, and they begin to they begin to yield to what you may be complaining about, but they yield on it, and they actually make it sound as though they're doing it because of your incessant complaining.
They're doing you a favor then.
They're doing you a favor.
Right.
So they're in other words, they're treating your expectations in the relationship that you may have communicated as though is a favor. In other words, they treat their integrity to the relationship as though their integrity is a gift to you. If you're experiencing that, you are actually facing somebody who is manipulative, very controlling. Are they ignoring your problems? And these are just a few laws that we're going through here. But if you're experiencing in the upcoming episodes, we will go through even more. We'll go through even more laws. We probably just went through about 7 here tonight. 7 or 8, if so much. And if you're actually there and you're experiencing any of those things that we're saying here, something is wrong. And you may feel it, but you can't really put your hand on it. You can't really identify what it is and why you're feeling like this. You can't really articulate it because you weren't really educated in the psychological perspective of this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you may be even voicing your problems and they show no kind of empathy for it. They just glaze over it, they just ignore it. And they just go back to how. So when I say ignoring your problems, you might begin to express something in a passionate manner because of how long you're experiencing it and there's no remedy.
Right.
And the person just begins to know, instead of addressing the problem, they begin to make the issue about how you communicate in the problem. Are you experiencing that? That's a manipulative person, very controlling.
All of this strongly resembles narcissism.
It is. Anybody who's actually using psychological laws of power are narcissists. And narcissists are persons who are very, very obsessed with their self-importance and actually having a sense of superiority in any conversation, always having the upper hand, where they are never when they are free of any kind of responsibility. And in their freedom of responsibility, you are the one to do all the work.
Which is what we see here in the laws, the psychological laws.
Yeah, and then that same person may actually not communicate to you directly when they have a problem. They go and they find somebody, their friend or their partner, the co-worker to go and actually say things that are not true about you because you're not actually meeting their criteria. So they begin to discredit you because you're not meeting their establishment of their criteria.
Which is one set of self-centered behavior.
Yeah. Right. And in those cases, they may actually even give you things like silent treatment, or always reproaching everything they're doing. They're reproaching every single thing, ignoring their responsibility to the connection, ignoring their responsibility to your expectations also. Are you experiencing where people actually always seem as though there is always a sense of they're not pleased and they're doing things to show that they're not pleased? There's no communication. Your expectations are being ignored, and then they want to show and they're not pleased. So you are the one that actually has to always bow. That's control and manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are they always angry? They always try to intimidate you. Are you experiencing somebody who may be trying to intimidate you? Right? And they always speak as though they're threatening, or they're threatening to take aggressive action, or they might do things that are aggressive. Right?
Well, let them go on.
Causing you some kind of fear or some kind of discomfort. And they're doing all of that so that they can get their way.
Right.
Where they continue to show no responsibility for the connection so that you can bow and they can get their way. All that's control and manipulation. All these different laws that we're looking at here, that we will look at in the upcoming episodes, are laws that we encourage you, if you're experiencing that, to stop and actually stop and assess what's going on. Assess what's going on, because what you're doing is really subjecting your spirit to another person. Just like Eve subjecting her spirit to the serpent in the garden. And you actually end up being, what you're doing is actually making this person your Lord. You're giving them
the authority.
Through the psychological laws of power, you have literally, as Kelly put it, given this person authority over you. And they are the ones who will control you and keep you in a living hell because you are seeking their validation. And if you're experiencing that, I encourage you to stop and reconsider where you're standing, and consider that the Holy Spirit, for those of you who are familiar with walking in Christ, know that you are validated internally, not externally. And therefore, the only way for the connection to continue healthily is for both parties as equals to come to the table, express their expectations, and come to mutual agreements. In cases like that, here's what I'm encouraging you all to do. Where you identify that these things are going on, I encourage you to, number one, consider that you are validated internally by the Spirit of by the Holy Spirit in you, by what God has breathed into you, and everything that God has said is what your energy is. So you're validated by the Holy Spirit in you, and approach the person as an equal. Be direct. Be honest. All right? And where you see the manipulation coming in, do not participate in it. Stand by. Observe the manipulation as a self-existent person, as actually stand independent of the manipulation, and be frank and honest about the manipulation that is actually taking place. Because if you actually when you begin to identify the darkness it is revealed. And if the person is sincere, then they will actually reconsider their approach. If they are not sincere, that's a revelation of something. That's a revelation to you that you need to reconsider this so-called relationship, because it is not a relationship. It's your slavery to their importance.
Exactly. The slavery to their desire to want power.
Yeah. So pay attention. And if you need to take some time to learn how to articulate what they're doing through this podcast and the things that we're covering here, take your time. Even if you want to reach out to us, you can actually email us through the email on the screen. You reach out to us to be able to actually schedule a meet or a consultation. We do that. We give you that consultation free of charge.
I'll just repeat the email.
The email is zainelfuego@gmail.com. Right? It's actually on scrolling on the screen.
I just have a slight typo with the fuego. It says FCANEELFUEGO.
What's the typo there, way?
FUGO without the E.
Oh Lord. Okay, so that's the mom. We just correct that one time there. I forget the E there, boy. Alright, so there you go. Alright, we will be willing to actually have that consultation, your first consultation free, where you contact us and we will schedule that consultation. Right, so if you're dealing with these things, you want to actually, again, first step is to acknowledge it that you are validated by the Holy Spirit within you. Approach this person as an equal. Be direct. Be honest. Do not try to, if you're actually trying to swing the words in a way that doesn't offend them, I'm not saying be offensive or be disrespectful, but if you're actually trying to structure things around them so that you don't offend them, that is also, you're still functioning from some sort of validation, allowing them to validate you. So be direct, be honest. And where you see the manipulation taking place, do not participate in it. Don't respond emotionally to it. Observe it, identify it. Huh?
Know where you stand.
Exactly, identify it. Know where you stand. And ask questions of the person that's manipulating you. Don't get into arguments. Question the logic. Question the equity of what they're actually saying. Question it. Let them directly tell you what it is that they want. Right? And don't share how their manipulation makes you feel, because what you're doing is also putting yourself in a position to be validated. So don't share how you feel. They will actually take those feelings. If there's a manipulative person, they will take those feelings and they will use it against you later. They will exploit it. They will use it in some form of fashion to begin to be condescending, or to use it. They'll use it as a form of ammunition to attack.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're doing that, you address that, just as Paul put it in the New Testament. Identify the darkness. Don't get involved in identifying the darkness as to how that actually deals. You will speak about that after. You should only discuss what you feel with people that you trust. And if this person is manipulated, if this person is manipulative, that is not the person to discuss your intimacies with. You think, Eddie?
I was going to say people who are sincere as well.
Exactly. Try to avoid being to avoid being backed into a corner to feel guilty. Where that is actually feeling guilty, the self-existent approach is not that you try to validate or to defend, but that you should question the logic as to why they're actually saying that and why you should actually feel guilty for something like that. Question it. Right? Don't treat them as an equal. Respect their self-existent dignity, but call them to responsibility for their actions. Ask questions. Yeah, and if the person is actually threatening you, don't back down as though you are afraid. Again, that is actually another manipulative approach to try to get their way. If you feel like they're actually doing things to make you feel dependent on them, question it. Questions. Do not defend. Question. Right? Question why this is like this. Ask questions. Right?
And make decisions independent of their resources.
Yeah, so you
take away yourself from the dependency on them.
Right. So as best as possible, as Kelly's saying, you want to approach the situation where you are not dependent on them. Right. So where you feel like they're actually doing things to make them come to you, self-existently acknowledge the spirit in you and begin to gain information in the areas that you don't think that you have enough information. The internet is there. You can gain information in many different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where you actually see that they may be doing things to actually get you to validate. And sometimes when you deal with a manipulative person, they may offer things, and from the moment that you accept it, they feel that they have been freed of the responsibility, because their sense of relationship is not responsibility to your expectations. Their sense of relationship is that they purchase your trust. Right. So they will always do nice things for you. Acts of charity, they will do those things, but not give up themselves. You want to actually, again, identify your personal validation, your self-validation as within, and approach that as an equal. Right? If you want more information as to how to actually handle a situation in this context, feel free in particular to email us at zainelfuego@gmail.com, and we will, your first consultation is free. Yeah. So on that note, Kelly, I think that's enough.
Yeah, I think we have went through sufficient.
That's enough hot talk for tonight.
Yeah. And we really do hope that if you are experiencing this, that you make this step, the first step out or a step back.
Yeah.
Reach out today for help.
All right. So on that note, we want to thank each and every one of you that actually came out and actually spent the last 2 hours and 40 minutes with us as we slow down the pace and just had a nice cool talk on the psychological laws of power, and to help wake you up if you are actually a victim of these tactics of manipulation and tactics of control, and to identify it in your life, because you may have been experiencing negative emotions and you don't know why, you don't know how to go about it, what exactly is going on. This is your wake-up call, right? And if you actually want to actually contact us, again, use that email, zainelfuego.com is on the bottom of the screen, and we will schedule that consultation. Right? We desire that you be free of the enslavement, the emotional enslavement and the mental enslavement. God has, and in the context of Christ is in all, and it is everyone's right to be self-existent. It is everybody's right to have self-existent freedom and self-existent happiness, to enjoy the self-existence that you were that is intended for you. Yeah. So, Kelly,
With that said,
anything you
we
wanna?
wa-
Any
no,
last words
well,
you wanna leave with them?
blessings, much love, abundance, peace, and self-existence.
Self-existence. All right. This is Zainel Fuego, the Christ hematologist, and
Lady Keturah, the lioness.
right on exposing the psychological laws of power that are being used in your in your relationship, even in your spirituality, because this actually applies to the circles that you may have come out from, where there is psychological control, whether intentional or unintentional, in in Christian in your denominational circles, where you may be dealing with the same laws of the same psychological manipulation and control that is robbing you of your fullness, of you actually functioning in the self-existence of Christ Yeshua. Yeah. So this is not only in relationships, with regards to family, friends, significant others, marriage. It's also in regards to relationship, and even in
Right.
life. Right? We actually hit this here with life, Kelly.
No, I was gonna say in spirituality as well.
Yeah. So even in life, how you actually managing your relationships in life, your friendships, your relationships at work. Yeah. If you're experiencing all these negative emotions and you don't know how, again, reach out to us, and we definitely will be willing to have that consultation with you. All right. So blessings and much love.
Have a good night.
The Mindset Mentorship Podcast, where we reveal the self-existence, freedom, and the self-existence in spirituality, relationship, and life. Blessings and much love.